Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Vincent Morrison had built his life like a fortress, methodical, calculated, and seemingly impenetrable. At 38, he owned 3 successful auto repair shops across the city, each one a testament to his relentless work ethic and razor-sharp business instincts. His calloused hands told the story of a man who'd climbed from the gutters of Detroit's East Side, where his alcoholic father had abandoned him and his mother when he was 12. The morning sun cast long shadows across his flagship garage as Vincent wiped grease from his hands, surveying his domain. His employees moved with military precision. He'd handpicked each one, valuing loyalty above all else. Trust, once broken, was never mended in Vincent's world. It was a lesson he'd learned watching his mother work 3 jobs to keep food on the table after his father's betrayal. Boss, Mrs. Henderson's here about her transmission, called Tommy, his lead mechanic and one of the few people Vincent considered family. Vincent nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. 3 years had passed since the divorce, yet the wounds remained fresh. Claudia had taken half his assets, turned their twin daughters Emma and Sophie against him with her poison, and then delivered the cruelest blow of all, denying him custody of Lucas, his 7-year-old son, the boy who'd inherited Vincent's dark eyes and stubborn determination. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd built this empire to provide for his family, working 16-hour days, missing school plays and soccer games. Claudia had called him absent, neglectful. But when Lucas got sick, when the cancer diagnosis turned their world upside down, Vincent had been the one fighting for every treatment, every chance at survival. His phone buzzed. Dr. Martinez from Children's Hospital. Vincent's chest tightened. It had been 3 months since Lucas passed, but every call from the hospital still sent ice through his veins. Mr. Morrison, I wanted to follow up on the memorial fund you established for Lucas. We've received some additional donations, and there's something else. Could you come in today? Vincent agreed, though he couldn't imagine what else needed discussing. He'd already paid every bill, established the fund, and even donated equipment to the pediatric oncology ward. Money couldn't bring Lucas back, but it was the only weapon he had left against the helplessness that had consumed him during those final weeks. As he drove to the hospital, memories flooded back. Lucas in the hospital bed, bald head gleaming under fluorescent lights, still managing to smile when Vincent read him stories about knights and dragons. Dad, when I'm better, will you teach me to fix cars? The question that would never need an answering. Dr. Martinez waited in his office, a manila folder on his desk. Vincent, I wanted you to hear this from me. We've been reviewing Lucas's case for a research study, and we discovered something troubling in his medical records. Vincent leaned forward, every muscle tense. What kind of troubling? Lucas's cancer was particularly aggressive, which puzzled us. However, we found traces of a specific chemical compound in his blood work, industrial-grade cleaning solvent, the kind used in manufacturing. The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. Are you saying someone poisoned my son? Not intentionally, but prolonged exposure could have triggered the cancer. This compound isn't found in typical household products. Someone in Lucas's environment was regularly exposed to it, and they brought it home on their clothes, skin. Vincent's mind raced. Claudia worked at a boutique marketing firm downtown. Emma and Sophie lived with her full-time. He'd never been around industrial solvents except. Doctor, would this compound be found in automotive restoration work? Specifically, vintage car restoration? Dr. Martinez nodded grimly. Absolutely. That's one of the primary sources. Vincent felt the foundation of his world shift. Trevor Blackstone, Claudia's lover, the man she'd left him for, owned a vintage car restoration business. The same man who'd been sleeping in Vincent's bed, living in Vincent's house, around Vincent's children for months before the divorce. The same man who might have unknowingly poisoned Lucas. But as Vincent sat in his truck outside the hospital, a darker thought crept in. What if it hadn't been unknowing? What if Trevor had seen Lucas as an obstacle, a reminder of Claudia's past life? The thought seemed insane, but Vincent had learned that people were capable of unimaginable evil when they wanted something badly enough. He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer, Harold Stern. "Harold, I need you to quietly investigate something for me. Medical malpractice, environmental contamination, whatever angle you can find." And Harold? Discretion is everything. As he drove back to the garage, Vincent's grief began transforming into something harder, more focused. If Trevor had hurt Lucas, intentionally or not, there would be consequences. Vincent Morrison didn't forgive, and he never forgot. The game had just begun. Chapter 2. The Perfect Storm. 6 months before Lucas's diagnosis, Vincent had thought his marriage was solid. Sure, Claudia had been distant lately, more critical of his long hours, but he'd attributed it to stress from managing 3 kids while he built the business. He'd been planning to surprise her with a vacation to Hawaii, their first real getaway since Emma and Sophie were born. Instead, he came home early from a supplier meeting to find Claudia in their bedroom with Trevor Blackstone. The memory still burned. Not just the betrayal, but Claudia's reaction when she saw him standing in the doorway. No shame, no remorse, just cold calculation. "Vincent, we need to talk." Trevor had scrambled for his clothes, muttering apologies, but Claudia remained naked under the silk sheets Vincent had bought for their anniversary. "This has been going on for 6 months," she'd said, as if discussing the weather. "I want a divorce." Vincent had built his fortune by staying calm under pressure, but that afternoon he'd come dangerously close to violence. Only the sound of Lucas calling Daddy from downstairs had stopped him from wrapping his hands around Trevor's throat. The divorce proceedings had been brutal. Claudia hired Patricia Mills, the most vicious attorney in the city, while painting Vincent as an absent workaholic who cared more about his business than his family. She turned Emma and Sophie against him with carefully crafted lies about how Daddy didn't love them anymore, how he was trying to take them away from Mommy. But the cruelest blow came when she demanded primary custody of Lucas. "He needs stability," she'd argued in court. "Vincent's lifestyle isn't suitable for a young child." Judge Morrison, no relation, despite the name, had awarded Claudia primary custody of all 3 children, with Vincent getting every other weekend and Wednesday dinners. Half his assets, half his children, and somehow she'd made it seem like she was the victim. Now, armed with Dr. Martinez's revelation about the chemical compounds, Vincent began investigating Trevor Blackstone's background. What he discovered made his blood boil. Trevor wasn't just a vintage car restorer. He was a con artist with a pattern. In the past decade, he'd inserted himself into 3 other marriages, all wealthy women going through difficult periods. Each time, he'd love-bombed them, convinced them their husbands were inadequate, then moved in like a parasite. The first wife, Diana Westbrook, had lost custody of her children and most of her inheritance. The second, Rebecca Sterling, had suffered a mysterious allergic reaction that left her hospitalized for weeks, right after she'd started questioning Trevor's finances. The third, Margaret Crowley, had died in what police ruled an accidental overdose of sleeping pills. Vincent hired a private investigator named Rosa Delgado, a former detective who'd left the force after exposing corruption in her department. Rosa was thorough, ruthless, and most importantly, she operated in the gray areas where Vincent needed to work. "This guy's dangerous," Rosa reported during their meeting at a diner outside the city. "The pattern's too clean to be coincidence. He targets wealthy women with children, isolates them from their support systems, then gradually takes control of their assets. What about the chemical exposure? Could that have been intentional?" Rosa's expression darkened. "I pulled Trevor's work records. He's been cited multiple times for improper handling of toxic materials. Always claimed ignorance, paid the fines, moved on. But Vincent, there's something else." She slid a photograph across the table. It showed Trevor's workshop, but what caught Vincent's attention was the timing. The photo was dated 2 weeks before Lucas's first symptoms appeared. "I had a friend in environmental safety run some tests on samples I collected from Trevor's workshop. The chemical concentrations are off the charts, way beyond what you'd expect from normal restoration work. Either he's incredibly careless or he's been deliberately creating a toxic environment. Vincent's voice was barely a whisper, but Rosa heard the steel beneath it. There's more. I traced Trevor's movements during Lucas's treatment. 3 times, he visited the hospital when you weren't there. Security footage shows him in the children's wing, even though he had no official reason to be there. Vincent felt something cold and murderous settle in his chest. Trevor hadn't just stolen his wife and destroyed his family. He'd killed his son. Maybe not with his own hands, but through deliberate negligence that bordered on murder. That night, Vincent stood in Lucas's empty bedroom, looking at the model cars they'd built together, the superhero posters, the baseball glove that would never be used again. His phone rang, Claudia's number. "Vincent, we need to discuss the girls' summer plans." Her voice was calm, entitled, as if she hadn't destroyed everything good in his life. Vincent had planned to confront her about Trevor, about the chemicals, about what had really killed Lucas. Instead, he found himself saying, "Of course, whatever you think is best." The words tasted like poison, but Vincent had learned patience during his years building the business. Sometimes you had to let your enemies think they'd won before you destroyed them completely. After hanging up, he opened his laptop and began planning. Not just revenge, justice. Trevor and Claudia had taken everything from him. Now it was time to return the favor. The difference was Vincent Morrison played for keeps. Chapter 3. The Knock at the Door. The bridge stretched before Vincent like a gateway to oblivion. 3 weeks had passed since Lucas's funeral, 3 weeks of Emma and Sophie's accusing stares when he picked them up for his court-mandated visits. Claudia had poisoned them completely, turning his daughters into strangers who flinched when he tried to hug them. "Daddy doesn't care about us anymore," Sophie had whispered to Emma, not knowing Vincent could hear. "Mommy says he's just pretending." Standing on the steel girders in the pre-dawn darkness, Vincent understood how his father must have felt. Overwhelmed by responsibilities, crushed by failures, seeing no way forward. The difference was, Vincent had responsibilities that his father had abandoned. Emma and Sophie might hate him now, but they were still his daughters, still carried his blood. He thought of Lucas's last words, "Take care of the girls, Dad. They're going to need you." Even dying, his 7-year-old son had shown more strength than Vincent felt capable of mustering. Vincent climbed down from the bridge and drove home to his empty apartment. If he was going to survive this, he needed a plan. Not just for revenge, though that would come, but for rebuilding his relationship with his daughters and exposing the truth about what Trevor had done. 1 week later, Vincent was reviewing financial reports when a knock came. 3 sharp raps, followed by silence. He opened the door to find a woman in her 60s, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a tailored coat despite the summer heat. "Mr. Morrison? My name is Eleanor Westbrook. I believe you knew my daughter, Diana." Vincent's breath caught. Diana Westbrook, Trevor's first victim, according to Rose's investigation. "Please come in." Eleanor settled into Vincent's living room with the bearing of old money and older pain. "I've been watching the news about your son's passing. I'm truly sorry for your loss. But I'm here because I believe the man who destroyed my daughter's life is responsible." She opened a leather portfolio and spread documents across Vincent's coffee table. Medical records, legal papers, photographs. A roadmap of destruction that looked disturbingly familiar. Diana met Trevor 5 years ago, shortly after her husband died in a car accident. She was vulnerable, grieving, trying to raise 2 young children alone. Trevor presented himself as a widower who understood her pain. The photos showed Diana's transformation, from a vibrant woman to someone hollow-eyed and frail. Within 6 months, she'd given him access to her finances. Within a year, she'd lost custody of her children and most of her inheritance. Trevor claimed she'd become unstable, addicted to prescription medications. The courts believed him. Eleanor's smile was bitter. "Trevor is very convincing. He had witnesses, people he'd paid or manipulated. Diana's own children testified against her, said she'd become erratic and violent. By the time I could intervene, it was too late." She pulled out a manila folder. "But Diana wasn't his first victim, and your wife wasn't his last. I've spent 3 years documenting Trevor's pattern, building a case that law enforcement refuses to pursue. Vincent studied the documents. 3 women, all wealthy, all vulnerable, all destroyed by the same man. Why are you coming to me now? Because you have something the others didn't. Resources, connections, and most importantly, nothing left to lose. I've read about you, Mr. Morrison. You built an empire from nothing. You understand strategy, patience, long-term planning. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes sharp as flint. I want Trevor Blackstone destroyed. Not just financially, completely. I want him to lose everything he's stolen, everything he values, everyone he's manipulated. And I want him to know it was because of what he did to our children. Vincent felt something stir in his chest. Not hope, exactly, but purpose. What are you proposing? An alliance. I have information, connections, resources from my late husband's business empire. You have skills I lack and motivation I understand. Together, we can accomplish what neither of us could alone. She pulled out a final document, a detailed psychological profile of Trevor Blackstone, compiled by a forensic psychiatrist. Trevor is a narcissist with sociopathic tendencies. He believes he's untouchable because he's never faced real consequences. That's his weakness. Vincent scanned the profile. Everything aligned with what Rosa had discovered, but Eleanor's information went deeper. Trevor's childhood, his previous identities, his methods of manipulation, all laid out like a battle plan. There's something else, Eleanor continued. Trevor's been courting another victim, Melissa Chong, a pharmaceutical heiress whose husband died last year. She has twin daughters, same ages as yours. If we don't stop him soon, he'll destroy another family. The thought of Trevor destroying more children, more families, crystallized Vincent's resolve. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about preventing future victims. What do you need from me? Eleanor smiled, and for the first time since Lucas died, Vincent felt like he wasn't alone. Everything you've got, Mr. Morrison. This is going to be war. As Eleanor left, Vincent stood in his doorway, watching her disappear into the night. The knock at his door hadn't brought salvation. It had brought something better. It had brought purpose, allies, and the beginning of Trevor Blackstone's downfall. Vincent poured himself a scotch and began reading Eleanor's files. By morning, he would know everything there was to know about his enemy. By the end of the month, Trevor would begin to understand what it felt like to lose everything. The game was about to begin in earnest, and Vincent Morrison had just gained a powerful ally in his quest for justice. Chapter 4: The Web Titans. Eleanor's intelligence network was more extensive than Vincent had imagined. Her late husband, Richard Westbrook, had been a federal judge with connections throughout law enforcement and the legal community. Eleanor had spent 3 years quietly building alliances with others who'd encountered Trevor's pattern of destruction. They met again in Eleanor's Beacon Hill mansion, a room lined with legal documents and surveillance photos. Also present was Dr. Sarah Chan, a forensic accountant who'd worked with the FBI, and Marcus Rivera, a former Special Forces operator who now ran corporate security. Trevor's made a critical mistake, Eleanor announced, spreading new photographs across the mahogany table. He's gotten greedy. The photos showed Trevor with Melissa Chong, the pharmaceutical heiress Eleanor had mentioned. But what caught Vincent's attention were the background details. Trevor was wearing an expensive watch he couldn't afford, driving a car registered to Claudia, and most damning, he was using the same engagement ring he'd given Diana Westbrook 5 years earlier. Melissa's father built Chong Pharmaceuticals from nothing, Dr. Chen explained. She inherited controlling interest when he died, but she's been struggling with the business side. Perfect target for Trevor's usual approach. Marcus placed additional surveillance photos on the table. We've been monitoring Trevor's routine. He's gotten sloppy, confident. But here's the interesting part. He's been making regular visits to a storage facility outside the city. Vincent studied the images. Trevor entering and leaving a nondescript building with boxes, always at night, always alone. What's he storing? That's what we need to find out, Eleanor said. But first, we need to understand the timeline. How quickly is he moving with Melissa? Dr. Chun pulled out financial records. Faster than before. Melissa's already given him access to one of her smaller accounts, about $500,000. If the pattern holds, he'll propose within a month and have full access to her assets within 6 months. Vincent felt the familiar rage building. And her daughters? Ages 8 and 9. He's already started the grooming process, positioning himself as their new father figure while undermining their relationship with Melissa's family. The parallel to his own situation was nauseating. Vincent thought of Emma and Sophie, how Trevor had slowly inserted himself into their lives, turning them against their father with gifts and promises while painting Vincent as the enemy. "We can't let him destroy another family," Vincent said quietly. "What's our move?" Eleanor smiled. "We're going to give Trevor exactly what he wants, access to more money than he's ever imagined. But this time, it's going to be a trap." She explained the plan with the precision of a master strategist. Vincent would use his business connections to arrange a meeting between Trevor, a wealthy widow looking for investment opportunities in vintage car restoration. The widow would be Rosa Delgado, the private investigator, playing a role with an elaborate backstory Eleanor had constructed. "Trevor won't be able to resist," Eleanor continued. "Rosa will present herself as vulnerable, recently bereaved, with more money than she knows how to invest. He'll see an opportunity to run his usual con while maintaining his relationship with Melissa." Marcus pulled out building schematics. "While Trevor's focused on Rosa, we'll have access to his storage facility. Whatever he's hiding there, it's important enough that he visits every week." Dr. Chin added, "I've also been analyzing the financial patterns from his previous victims. There's money missing, significant amounts that never appeared in Trevor's known accounts. He's hiding assets somewhere." Vincent studied the plan, looking for weaknesses. "What about Claudia? She'll warn Trevor if she suspects anything." "That's the beauty of it," Eleanor replied. "Claudia doesn't know about Trevor's pattern. She thinks she's special, that their relationship is real. We're going to use her ignorance against her." The meeting ended with specific assignments. Vincent would make the introduction between Trevor and wealthy widow Rosa. Marcus would handle surveillance and break into the storage facility. Dr. Chun would continue tracking financial patterns. Eleanor would coordinate everything from behind the scenes. As Vincent drove home, he called Rosa to brief her on the plan. "Can you pull off playing a grieving widow with money to burn?" Rosa's laugh was sharp. "Vincent, I've been undercover with drug cartels and human traffickers. I think I can handle one small-time con artist." Trevor's not small-time. He's dangerous, and he's smart. But he's not expecting resistance. That's his weakness. He's used to victims, not opponents. We're going to show him the difference. That evening, Vincent video called Emma and Sophie. Claudia supervised from off-camera, as required by the custody agreement. His daughters were polite but distant, still poisoned against him by months of Claudia's manipulation. "How was school today?" Vincent asked. "Fine," Emma replied, not meeting his eyes through the screen. Sophie was more direct. "Mommy says you don't really care about us anymore. She says you're just asking because the judge makes you." The words hit like physical blows, but Vincent forced himself to stay calm. "Your mother is wrong. I love you both more than anything in the world. I know it's hard to believe right now, but I'm working to fix things." After the call ended, Vincent sat in the darkness of his apartment. Trevor hadn't just killed Lucas. He'd stolen Vincent's daughter's love and trust. But that was about to change. Phase 1 of the plan would begin tomorrow. Trevor Blackstone had spent years preying on grieving families, but he'd never faced someone who fought back with the same ruthless intelligence he used to destroy others. Vincent poured himself a scotch and raised it in a silent toast to Lucas's memory. Justice was coming, and it would be brutal. Chapter 5: The Bait. Rosa Delgado had transformed herself into exactly the type of woman Trevor couldn't resist. Margaret Thornfield, wealthy widow, recently lost her husband to cancer, inherited his successful importing business, but felt overwhelmed by the financial complexities. She dressed the part, expensive but conservative clothes, understated jewelry, the kind of nervous energy that suggested vulnerability beneath the wealth. Vincent arranged the meeting at his flagship garage, selling it as a coincidence. "Trevor, I'd like you to meet Margaret Thornfield." "Margaret, this is Trevor Blackstone. He's the vintage car restoration expert I mentioned." Trevor's reaction was immediate and predictable. His eyes lit up with predatory interest, but he played it smooth, offering condolences for her loss and expertise for her automotive investments. Within minutes, he was suggesting dinner to discuss potential business partnerships. "I've been looking for someone who understands classic cars," Rosa said, playing Margaret perfectly. "My late husband left me a collection, but I don't know their value or how to maintain them properly." Trevor practically salivated. "I'd be happy to take a look. These investments can be quite profitable if handled correctly." Vincent excused himself, letting the two continue their conversation. Through the garage's security cameras, he watched Trevor deploy his full charm offensive, sympathetic listener, knowledgeable expert, understanding friend who just happened to be devastatingly handsome. That evening, Marcus Rivera prepared for the storage facility break-in. The building was in an industrial area with minimal security, perfect for someone who didn't want their activities scrutinized. Marcus had military-grade equipment and the skills to use it without leaving evidence. "Remember, we're gathering information, not stealing anything," Eleanor instructed through his earpiece. "We need to know what Trevor's hiding, but we can't tip him off that we're onto him." Vincent waited in Eleanor's study, monitoring communications while Dr. Chun worked her financial magic on another computer. They discovered that Trevor had been siphoning money from his victims through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. "He's been planning this for years," Dr. Chun reported. "The money from Diana Westbrook, Rebecca Sterling, even some of Margaret Crowley's assets. It's all been filtered through fake businesses and parked in the Cayman Islands." Marcus's voice crackled through the radio. "I'm inside. Jesus Christ. Eleanor, you need to see this." The storage unit was larger than expected, filled with boxes of documents, photographs, and personal items. But what made Vincent's blood run cold were the walls, covered with photos and detailed notes about Trevor's victims. Diana, Rebecca, Margaret, Claudia, and most chilling of all, a new section dedicated to Melissa Chong and her daughters. "He's been planning Melissa's destruction for months," Marcus reported, photographing everything. There are detailed psychological profiles, financial records, even transcripts of her therapy sessions. This guy's not just a con artist. He's a full-blown stalker. But the worst discovery was in the final box. Medical records, lab reports, and chemical analyses, all related to the compounds found in Lucas's blood. Trevor had been deliberately exposing the boy to toxic chemicals for months before the cancer diagnosis. Vincent's hands shook as Marcus transmitted the images. There it was, in Trevor's own handwriting. "Subject shows increasing sensitivity to compound exposure. Recommend increasing frequency of contact to accelerate timeline." Eleanor's voice was steel. "He murdered your son, Vincent. This is premeditated murder." The evidence was overwhelming, but Vincent knew the legal system would take years to prosecute, if they could make the charges stick at all. Trevor was careful, experienced, and he had Claudia's testimony that Vincent was unstable and vindictive. "We have enough to destroy him," Dr. Chin said, reviewing the financial evidence. "These offshore accounts, the stolen assets, the fraudulent business records. I can unravel his entire operation." But Vincent wanted more than Trevor's money. He wanted the man to understand what it felt like to lose everything, to watch helplessly as his world collapsed piece by piece. "Rosa's dinner with Trevor is tomorrow night," Vincent said quietly. "We proceed with the plan, but now we know exactly what we're dealing with." Eleanor nodded. "A predator who's never faced consequences. That changes tomorrow." Marcus finished photographing the evidence and prepared to leave. "There's something else. I found plane tickets. Trevor's planning to leave the country next month, probably when he gets access to Melissa's full assets." The timeline had just compressed. Whatever they were going to do, it had to happen fast. As Vincent drove home, he thought about Lucas's final days, how Trevor had visited the hospital when Vincent wasn't there. Had he been checking on his handiwork, ensuring the chemicals were doing their intended damage? The rage was becoming something else, something colder and more focused. Trevor Blackstone had spent years hunting vulnerable families, but he'd made a critical error. He'd targeted Vincent Morrison's family, And Vincent Morrison was nobody's victim. Tomorrow night, the real game would begin. And this time, Trevor would be the one walking into a trap. Chapter 6. The First Strike. Rosa played her role to perfection during dinner. She was vulnerable but not desperate, wealthy but not flaunting it, exactly the kind of target Trevor had perfected over years of hunting. Vincent watched from across the restaurant, hidden behind a newspaper, as Trevor deployed his full arsenal of manipulation. "I lost my wife to cancer 3 years ago," Trevor lied smoothly, reaching across the table to touch Rosa's hand. "I understand the pain of watching someone you love suffer." Rosa's performance was flawless, tears in her eyes, gratitude for his understanding, slowly opening up about her loneliness and fear of making the wrong financial decisions. By the end of the evening, Trevor was offering to personally evaluate her husband's car collection. "I have a warehouse in Newton where I could examine them properly," he suggested. "No charge, of course. I just want to help." Vincent smiled grimly. The warehouse was another property Trevor had acquired through his cons, registered under one of his shell companies. Taking Rosa, there would give them access to more of his operation. The next morning, Eleanor convened an emergency meeting. Marcus had discovered something troubling during his surveillance of Melissa Chong. Trevor was accelerating his timeline with her as well. "He proposed last night," Eleanor announced, showing them photos from Marcus's surveillance. 3 months ahead of his usual schedule. Something spooked him. Dr. Chin pulled up financial records on her laptop. "I might know what. Melissa's company is facing a hostile takeover bid. If it succeeds, her personal wealth will be locked up in legal battles for years. Trevor needs to move fast to access her assets." Vincent studied the timeline. "How long do we have?" 2 weeks, maybe less." Melissa's agreed to a quick ceremony in Vegas. Once they're married, Trevor will have legal access to everything. The plan needed adjustment. They couldn't wait for Trevor to slowly reveal himself. They had to force his hand immediately. "Rosa's warehouse visit is tomorrow," Vincent said. "We use that to begin the pressure. Marcus, can you modify your surveillance to make Trevor paranoid?" Marcus grinned. "I can make him think he's being followed without him ever seeing who's doing it." Classic psychological warfare. Eleanor added her resources. "I have contacts in the IRS who can begin routine audits of Trevor's shell companies. Nothing that would tip him off immediately, but enough to make him nervous." Dr. Chun had been working on something more sophisticated. "I've been analyzing Trevor's psychological profile. He's a narcissist who believes he's untouchable, but he's also deeply paranoid about exposure. If we can make him think multiple threats are closing in simultaneously, he'll make mistakes," Vincent finished. "Get sloppy." The pieces were falling into place. Rosa would lead Trevor to the warehouse, where Marcus would be waiting with surveillance equipment. Dr. Chun would trigger financial investigations that would make Trevor's money harder to access. Eleanor would use her legal connections to create background pressure. And Vincent would begin phase 2 of his personal revenge against Claudia. That afternoon, Vincent called his ex-wife. "Claudia, we need to discuss the girls' school situation. I want to contribute more to their education." Claudia's voice was suspicious. "What kind of contribution?" "Private school. The best money can buy. Emma and Sophie deserve every advantage." It was a calculated move. Claudia's greed would overcome her suspicion, and she'd see Vincent's offer as validation that she'd won their battle. But what she didn't know was that Vincent had chosen a school with a particular specialty. They required extensive background checks on all adults in the children's lives. Within days, the school would be asking uncomfortable questions about Trevor's frequent presence around the girls, his lack of formal employment history, his suspicious financial background. The investigation would seem routine, but it would put Trevor under exactly the kind of scrutiny he'd spent years avoiding. Rosa called that evening. Trevor took the bait. "We're meeting at the warehouse tomorrow at 2 p.m. He's bringing some kind of chemical testing equipment. Says he wants to check for environmental damage to the cars." Vincent's blood chilled. Chemical testing equipment, just like he'd used on Lucas. "Change of plans," Vincent said. "We're not just gathering evidence anymore. Tomorrow, we start destroying him." Eleanor was waiting when Vincent arrived at her mansion. "Are you sure about this?" Once we cross this line, there's no going back. Vincent thought about Lucas in the hospital bed, asking why the treatments weren't working. He thought about Emma and Sophie learning to hate their father because of Trevor's manipulation. He thought about Melissa Chang's daughters, who would be next if they didn't act. "He murdered my son," Vincent said quietly. There was never any going back. Eleanor nodded. "Then tomorrow, we begin the reckoning." As Vincent prepared for sleep, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Lucas died. Anticipation. Not happiness, not hope, but the cold satisfaction of a plan coming together. Trevor Blackstone had spent years destroying families without consequences. Tomorrow, the consequences would begin. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. The Newton warehouse stood like a monument to Trevor's years of theft, purchased with Diana Westbrook's money, registered under a shell company funded by Rebecca Sterling's assets, and used to store the trophies of his various cons. Rosa arrived precisely at 2 p.m., playing the nervous widow to perfection. Vincent watched from a van across the street, monitoring the audio feed from Rosa's hidden microphone. Marcus was positioned inside the warehouse, having gained entry during the early morning hours. Dr. Chan worked from Eleanor's study, ready to execute the financial attacks that would begin unraveling Trevor's empire. "Margaret, thank you for trusting me with this." Trevor's voice came through the speakers, oily with false sincerity. "I want to make sure these cars are properly preserved. They're not just investments, they're pieces of history." Rosa played her part beautifully. "I just don't understand any of this." Richard handled all the business affairs. "I feel so lost without him." Trevor's response was predictable. Reassurance, offers of guidance, subtle suggestions that she needed a man to protect her from the complexities of wealth. Vincent had heard the same script used on Claudia, the same predatory patience that had destroyed his marriage. But today, Trevor was walking into a carefully constructed trap. "I brought some testing equipment," Trevor continued. "We need to check for environmental contamination. Old cars can leak chemicals that affect their value." Vincent's hands clenched. The same equipment, the same excuse Trevor had used to introduce toxic compounds into Vincent's home. The man was so confident in his methods that he was literally reusing his murder weapon. Marcus's voice crackled through the earpiece. "He's got a full kit. Industrial solvents, testing strips, the works. This is exactly what he used on Lucas." That was the signal. Dr. Chin began her assault on Trevor's financial network, triggering simultaneous audits of 3 shell companies while freezing assets in 2 offshore accounts. The attacks would take hours to fully manifest, but they would create immediate pressure. Eleanor was handling the legal front, using her deceased husband's connections to trigger investigations into Trevor's business licenses and environmental safety practices. By evening, Trevor would be facing scrutiny from multiple agencies. But Vincent's contribution was more personal. He called Claudia. "I need to see the girls tonight." "Emergency." "Vincent, it's not your scheduled day." "Claudia." Emma fell off her bike and needed stitches. "I'm at the hospital now." The lie came easily, and Claudia's maternal instincts overrode her hostility. "Which hospital?" "I'm coming now." "Children's Medical Center." "Emergency room." "And Claudia? You might want to leave Trevor at home. The girls are asking for their parents, not strangers." It was a calculated insult, designed to plant the first seed of doubt about Trevor's role in the family. While Claudia rushed to the hospital to find healthy daughters and a fabricated emergency, Trevor would be left alone to deal with the mounting pressure from the financial and legal attacks. At the warehouse, Trevor's phone began ringing. First his accountant, then his lawyer, then his banker. Each call brought worse news. Frozen accounts, investigation notices, demand for documentation he couldn't provide. "I'm sorry, Margaret," Trevor said, his smooth composure cracking. "I need to handle some business emergencies. Perhaps we could continue this another day." Rosa pressed her advantage. "Oh no, is everything all right? You look upset. Just some misunderstandings with financial institutions. Nothing serious." But Trevor's hands were shaking as he packed his chemical testing equipment. The man who'd spent years as a predator was discovering what it felt like to be prey. Vincent's phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. "He's leaving, moving fast, keeps looking over his shoulder." Whatever Chin did, it worked. The The psychological pressure was having its intended effect. Trevor was beginning to feel the walls closing in, but he didn't yet understand the scope of what was happening to him. Vincent drove to Children's Medical Center, where Claudia was demanding to see her injured daughter. "Where is she? Where's Emma?" "She's fine," Vincent said calmly. "I made a mistake. It wasn't Emma who was hurt. It was another child with the same name. Emma and Sophie are at your house, perfectly safe." Claudia's relief quickly turned to fury. "You lied to me. You dragged me across the city for nothing." "I was scared," Vincent replied, playing the concerned father. "When someone called about an injured child named Emma Morrison, I panicked. I didn't think clearly. It was a reasonable explanation, but it served a darker purpose." Vincent needed Claudia away from Trevor during the initial phase of their attack. By the time she returned home, Trevor would be deep in crisis mode, and his careful facade would be cracking. Eleanor called with an update. The IRS has found irregularities in 3 of Trevor's companies. He's facing immediate audits and potential criminal charges for tax evasion. Dr. Chun added her report. His offshore accounts are frozen pending investigations. I estimate he's lost access to about $8 million in the last 4 hours. Vincent felt cold satisfaction. This was just the beginning. Trevor had spent years slowly destroying his victims, but Vincent preferred a more direct approach. By tomorrow, Trevor would understand that his past had finally caught up with him. As evening fell, Vincent returned to his apartment to prepare for Phase 2. Trevor was wounded and paranoid, but he was still dangerous. The real test would come when he realized this wasn't random bad luck. Someone was deliberately hunting him. Vincent poured himself a scotch and called Rosa for her debrief. She performed flawlessly, but more importantly, she'd gotten Trevor to reveal his methods and equipment. The evidence would be crucial for what came next. "He's exactly what we thought," Rosa reported. "Confident, manipulative, and completely convinced of his own invincibility. But he's also starting to crack under pressure." Perfect. Trevor Blackstone had built his life on being the hunter, never the hunted. Vincent was about to teach him the difference, and the lesson would be brutal. Chapter 8. The Walls Close In. Trevor's world began collapsing with mathematical precision. By morning, 4 separate government agencies were investigating his businesses. His assets were frozen in 3 countries, and his carefully constructed identity was unraveling thread by thread. Vincent watched the destruction unfold from Eleanor's study, surrounded by monitors displaying Trevor's mounting crisis. Dr. Chun had orchestrated the financial assault with surgical precision. Each frozen account, each triggered audit, each investigation notice designed to maximize psychological pressure while remaining legally bulletproof. He tried to access his primary offshore account 6 times last night, Dr. Chun reported. Each denial is being logged by the Cayman Islands Banking Authority. The man's panicking. Marcus had maintained surveillance throughout the night. Trevor's been awake since 3 a.m., making phone calls, pacing his apartment. He's paranoid, but hasn't figured out this is coordinated. The genius of Eleanor's plan was its apparent randomness. To Trevor, it looked like a series of coincidental investigations and bureaucratic mistakes. He couldn't see the web that was tightening around him. But Vincent wanted more than financial destruction. He wanted Trevor to experience the same helplessness that had consumed Vincent during Lucas's final days. "It's time for Phase 3, Vincent announced. "Eleanor, can your contacts arrange a wellness check on Trevor? Anonymous tip about potential self-harm." Eleanor smiled grimly. "Already in motion. Police should arrive within the hour. The wellness check would find nothing dangerous, but it would add another layer of scrutiny. Trevor would have to explain to police why someone thought he was suicidal, why his finances were under investigation, why his business licenses were being questioned. More importantly, it would establish an official record of Trevor's deteriorating mental state." Vincent's phone rang. Claudia, predictably furious about the previous night's hospital incident. "I don't know what game you're playing, but—" "No games," Vincent interrupted. "I was scared about Emma. I made a mistake. It happens to people who actually care about their children." The barb at home. Claudia's voice became defensive. "I care about my children. Everything I do is for them." including bringing Trevor around them, a man who's currently under investigation by the IRS. Vincent had planted the seed carefully. Claudia didn't know about the investigations yet, but her silence confirmed his suspicion. She was already sensing that something was wrong with Trevor's sudden financial problems. "What are you talking about?" asked Trevor, Vincent suggested. "Ask him why his accountant's been calling all morning, why his bank accounts are frozen, why the DEA is suddenly interested in his chemical storage practices." Vincent hung up before Claudia could respond. The doubt was planted, and Claudia's own greed would do the rest. She'd start asking Trevor uncomfortable questions, adding domestic pressure to his mounting professional crisis. At Eleanor's mansion, Marcus reported another development. Melissa Chong postponed the Vegas wedding. Her lawyers are advising caution until Trevor's financial situation stabilizes. Vincent felt satisfaction settle in his chest. Melissa was safe, at least temporarily. Her daughters wouldn't become Trevor's next victims. But the real psychological warfare was just beginning. Vincent had prepared a package for Trevor: copies of medical records, chemical analysis reports, and most damning of all, photographs from the storage unit showing Trevor's documentation of Lucas's poisoning. He didn't sign the package or include a return address. Just the evidence, delivered to Trevor's apartment by courier. "He's going to know someone's onto him," Eleanor warned. "Good," Vincent replied. "I want him to know. I want him to understand that Lucas had a father who doesn't forgive or forget." Rosa called with her final report from playing Margaret Thornfield. "Trevor canceled our follow-up meeting. His exact words were unexpected business complications. The man's running scared." By afternoon, the cascade was unstoppable. Trevor's business insurance was canceled due to environmental safety concerns. His workshop lease was terminated for chemical violations. His car restoration license was suspended pending investigation. But the cruelest blow came when Claudia finally confronted him. Marcus had positioned listening devices near Trevor's apartment, and Vincent could hear the argument through his earpiece. Claudia's voice was shrill with panic. "The IRS called me. Trevor, they want to know about my financial relationship with you. They're asking about gifts, about money transfers." Trevor's response was desperate. "It's just a misunderstanding. Some paperwork got mixed up. I'll handle it." "Handle it? Your bank accounts are frozen. The police came due a welfare check. What the hell is happening?" Vincent smiled coldly. The pressure was working exactly as planned. Trevor was being forced to choose between maintaining his facade with Claudia or focusing on his survival. And Vincent knew which choice a narcissist would make. "Claudia, I need to leave town for a few days. Business trip. Things will calm down while I'm gone." "Leave town? Now? What about Emma and Sophie? What about us?" "This isn't about us. It's about business. You wouldn't understand." The mask was slipping. Under pressure, Trevor was revealing his true nature. The cold manipulation, the dismissive arrogance, the complete lack of genuine feeling for anyone but himself. Vincent heard Claudia's sharp intake of breath. For the first time, she was seeing Trevor as Vincent had always seen him, a predator who used people until they were no longer useful. "I'm taking the girls to my mother's," Claudia said quietly, "until you figure out what's happening." It was the beginning of the end for Trevor's relationship with Claudia, but Vincent knew the man wouldn't go quietly. Cornered predators were dangerous, and Trevor still had one card to play. He could expose what he'd done to Lucas, potentially implicating Claudia as an accomplice. As evening fell, Vincent prepared for the final phase. Trevor was wounded, isolated, and desperate, but he was also at his most dangerous. The reckoning was about to begin in earnest. Chapter 9. The Final Reckoning. Trevor's desperation made him reckless. Faced with the complete collapse of his carefully constructed life, he chose the nuclear option. If he was going down, he'd take Claudia with him. Vincent intercepted the call through Marcus's surveillance equipment. Trevor's voice was different now. Gone was the smooth charm, replaced by barely controlled panic. "Claudia, we need to talk. About Lucas. About what really happened." The silence on Claudia's end spoke volumes. Vincent realized with cold clarity that his ex-wife had known more than she'd admitted. Perhaps not the full scope of Trevor's deliberate poisoning, but something. I don't know what you mean, Claudia said, but her voice lacked conviction. The chemicals in my workshop, the ones Lucas was exposed to when he visited. You knew they were dangerous, but you brought him anyway because you wanted Vincent to suffer. Vincent's blood turned to ice. Claudia hadn't just been Trevor's victim. She'd been his accomplice. The woman he'd loved, the mother of his children, had deliberately endangered Lucas out of spite. Marcus's voice crackled through the earpiece. Vincent, we're recording everything. This is evidence of premeditated murder. But evidence wasn't enough anymore. Not for what they'd done to Lucas. Eleanor was monitoring police communications from her study. Trevor's trying to negotiate immunity by offering information about Claudia. He's desperate enough to destroy her completely. Vincent made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, but felt as inevitable as breathing. Eleanor, I need you to make a call. Tell the police you have evidence of a murder conspiracy, but the witness needs protection before he'll talk. Vincent, what are you planning? Justice. Vincent drove to Trevor's apartment building, arriving just as police cars pulled up outside. Trevor was trapped between multiple investigations and Claudia's growing suspicion. His only escape was to flee the country, but his frozen assets made that impossible. Perfect. Vincent waited in the parking garage, knowing Trevor's patterns from weeks of surveillance. The man was predictable in crisis. He'd try to retrieve cash and documents from a hidden safe in his storage unit, then disappear before anyone could connect all the pieces of his various crimes. Trevor emerged from the elevator at 11 p.m., moving fast but trying to appear casual. He was carrying a duffel bag and kept checking his phone, probably monitoring his frozen accounts, hoping for a miracle that would never come. Vincent stepped out of the shadows as Trevor reached his car. Hello, Trevor. Trevor spun around, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, terror. Vincent, what are you doing here? I wanted to thank you, Vincent said conversationally. You taught me something valuable about justice. Trevor's hand moved toward his pocket, but Vincent was faster. Years of physical labor had kept him strong, and months of planning had given him every advantage. You see, I spent months thinking about legal justice, Vincent continued, backing Trevor against his car. Courts, lawyers, evidence, appeals. All very civilized. But then I realized, you never gave Lucas a fair trial before you murdered him. It wasn't murder, Trevor stammered. The chemicals were an accident. I didn't know. Vincent pulled out his phone and played the recording of Trevor's conversation with Claudia. Trevor's own voice filled the garage. The chemicals in my workshop. The ones Lucas was exposed to when he visited. Trevor's face went white. You can't prove anything. I don't need to prove anything to anyone but myself. What happened next was swift, efficient, and utterly final. Vincent had learned patience during his years building his business empire, but he'd also learned that some problems required permanent solutions. When police found Trevor's body 3 days later, it looked like suicide, a desperate man facing multiple investigations and the collapse of his entire life, choosing to end it rather than face the consequences. The note, written in Trevor's own handwriting, confessed to the murders of Lucas Morrison and Margaret Crowley, apologized to his victims' families, and expressed remorse for a lifetime of manipulation and theft. The handwriting was genuine because Vincent had forced Trevor to write it before ending his miserable existence. Eleanor destroyed the surveillance equipment and financial records that could have led back to their group. Dr. Chun eliminated the digital trail of their investigation. Marcus ensured that no physical evidence remained. The official investigation concluded that Trevor Blackstone had been a serial predator who'd finally cracked under the weight of his crimes in multiple investigations. His stolen assets were recovered and returned to his victims' families. Melissa Chong and her daughters were safe. Claudia faced her own reckoning. The recording of her conversation with Trevor was anonymously sent to the police, along with evidence of her complicity in Lucas's murder. She was arrested 2 weeks later and eventually sentenced to 15 years for conspiracy and child endangerment. Vincent fought for and won full custody of Emma and Sophie. It took months of therapy and patience, But gradually his daughters began to understand that their father had never stopped loving them, had never stopped fighting for them. They never learned the full truth about Trevor's death or their father's role in their mother's imprisonment. Some truths were too heavy for children to carry. On the anniversary of Lucas's death, Vincent stood at his son's grave with Eleanor, Marcus, Dr. Chun, and Rosa, the unlikely family he'd found in his quest for justice. They'd done something the legal system couldn't or wouldn't do. They'd stopped a predator permanently and saved future victims. Vincent placed a small model car on Lucas's headstone, the same type they'd built together during those final precious weeks. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "I took care of the girls. And I made sure the monster who hurt you can never hurt anyone again." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and for a moment, Vincent could almost hear his son's voice. "I knew you would, Dad. I always knew you would." Vincent Morrison had learned that some wrongs couldn't be forgiven, some enemies couldn't be redeemed, and some justice couldn't be achieved through civilized means. He'd paid a price for that knowledge. Pieces of his soul he'd never recover. But Emma and Sophie were safe. Future children were safe. And Trevor Blackstone would never destroy another family. It was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now, let's begin. The anesthesia fog still clung to Jake Bauer's mind when the nurse entered his recovery room. She carried a clipboard and something else, a manila envelope that seemed too heavy for its size. Jake tried to focus his eyes, but the fluorescent lights above him kept splitting into halos. His skull throbbed, where the surgeons had opened it just hours earlier to remove the tumor that had been growing against his frontal lobe for God knows how long. "Mr. Bowers." The nurse's voice was professional, but carried an edge of discomfort. "Someone dropped this off for you. Said it was urgent." Jake's hand shook as he reached for the envelope. His fingers, still clumsy from the surgery, fumbled with the seal. Inside were legal documents, crisp and official. The words at the top swam into focus. Petition for dissolution of marriage. He read them 3 times before the reality penetrated the post-surgical haze. Stephanie was divorcing him. His wife of 17 years had filed papers while he was unconscious on an operating table, his skull open to the world, his life hanging by a thread. Clipped to the papers was a handwritten note on her monogram stationery, the set he'd given her for their 15th anniversary. "Jake, I can't be with you now. I found someone better, someone who can give me the life I deserve. Don't try to contact me. My lawyer will handle everything. S." Jake stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them to keep from screaming. 42 years old, and his entire life had just collapsed into a pile of legal paperwork and a cold, dismissive note. The tumor removal had been successful, the surgeon told him earlier. But Jake wondered if they'd accidentally taken out the part of his brain that understood reality. This couldn't be happening, but it was happening. Over the next 2 weeks in the hospital, Jake tried calling Stephanie 37 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. He texted, emailed, even messaged her through social media before realizing she'd blocked him everywhere. His 16-year-old daughter, Emma, answered once, her voice small and distant. "Dad, Mom says you need to respect her decision. She says you have to let her be happy. Emma, please. I just need to talk to her. 6 months. Tell her to give me 6 months to recover, and then, if she still wants, I have to go. Dad, I'm sorry." The line went dead. Jake Bowers had spent 20 years as an investigative journalist before transitioning to teaching at Northwestern University. He'd exposed corrupt politicians, unraveled corporate fraud, and brought down a human trafficking ring that operated through 3 states. He'd won awards, made enemies, and always found the truth hidden beneath layers of lies. But now, lying in a hospital bed with half his head shaved and a zipper of staples holding his skull together, he couldn't investigate anything. He could barely walk to the bathroom without a nurse's assistance. The physical therapy started on his 3rd day in the hospital. A cheerful woman named Gloria Small worked with him for an hour each morning, helping him relearn balance, coordination, fine motor skills. The tumor had pressed against areas controlling movement, and even though it was gone, his body had to remember how it used to work. "You're doing great, Mr. Bowers," Gloria encouraged as he shuffled down the hallway, gripping a walker. Most patients aren't this mobile after a craniotomy. Jake didn't feel great. He felt like a hollow shell, moving through motions because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering Stephanie's note. Someone better, as if he were a faulty appliance she was trading in for a newer model. On his 10th day, in the hospital, Anderson Burke stopped by. Burke was an old friend from Jake's journalism days. They'd met when Jake was writing an expose on medical billing fraud. And Burke, then a young resident, had provided inside information. Now Burke was a neurologist at a different hospital, and he'd driven 40 minutes to check on Jake. "Jesus, Jake." Burke pulled up a chair beside the bed. "I heard through the grapevine about Stephanie." "That's timing of the year," Jake offered bitterly. "I was going to say unconscionable." Burke leaned forward, his face serious. "Listen, I don't know what's going on with her, but I know you. You're one of the toughest people I've ever met. You'll get through this." "Will I?" Jake gestured at himself, the hospital gown, the bandages, the IV pole. "I can barely walk, Anderson. My wife left me for someone better while I was fighting for my life. My daughter won't talk to me. What exactly am I getting through this for?" Burke was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because you're Jake fucking Bowers. The guy who took down Senator Morrison when everyone said it was impossible. The guy who spent 3 months undercover in a warehouse to expose labor violations. You don't quit. It's not in your DNA." After Burke left, Jake lay in the darkness of his hospital room, listening to the beep of monitors and the distant sounds of nurses making rounds. He wanted to believe his friend's words, but belief felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. The tumor was gone, but it had stolen something more than just tissue from his brain. It had stolen his future, his family, his purpose. They discharged him on day 14. Jake's insurance covered in-home physical therapy, but insurance didn't cover the emptiness of returning to a house that was no longer a home. Emma had been staying with Stephanie at what Jake assumed was her new boyfriend's place. The house was clean, too clean. Stephanie had removed her belongings with surgical precision. Her closet stood empty. Her side of the bathroom counter was bare. Even the photos had been taken down, leaving rectangular shadows on the walls where their life together used to be displayed. Jake spent the first week home in a haze of pain medication and physical therapy sessions. Gloria came 3 times a week, running him through exercises that left him exhausted and frustrated. His motor skills were improving, but slowly. Too slowly. His neighbor, an elderly woman named Geneva Page, brought him casseroles and worried over him like a grandmother, but Jake could barely force himself to eat. He tried reaching out to Stephanie one more time through her sister, Brittany Ritter. Brittany had always been kind to him, and he hoped she might intercede. "Jake, I'm so sorry," Brittany said over the phone, her voice thick with emotion. "I told Stephanie this was wrong, that she should at least wait until you were stable. But she's not herself. She won't listen to anyone. Do you know who this guy is? The someone better?" Brittany hesitated. "His name is Randall Jenkins. He's some big-shot pharmaceutical sales rep. Drives a Mercedes, takes her to expensive restaurants. Stephanie met him at an open house. She was hosting you. No, she works in real estate. He was looking at properties in the area." "How long?" "Jake, how long?" Brittany. Another pause. "About 4 months before your surgery." "I'm sorry. 4 months." Jake did the math. Stephanie had been seeing this Randall Jenkins since shortly after Jake's diagnosis. While he was going through MRIs and consultations with neurosurgeons. While he was writing goodbye letters to Emma in case he didn't survive the operation, Stephanie had been falling in love with a pharmaceutical sales rep with a Mercedes. After hanging up, Jake sat in his empty living room and stared at the shadows on the walls. 4 months felt like a lifetime and a heartbeat all at once. He'd been so focused on survival, on beating the tumor, that he'd missed his wife slipping away. Or maybe she'd never really been there at all. The physical therapy continued. Week 2, week 3, week 4. Jake could walk without the walker now. Though his balance was still shaky, his fine motor skills improved enough that he could type again, which meant he could work on his laptop, but work felt pointless. His department chair at Northwestern had granted him a medical leave for the semester, and Jake couldn't imagine standing in front of a classroom again, teaching journalism students about finding truth when his own life was a wreckage of lies. Emma texted him once, "Dad, I hope you're feeling better. Mom says I can visit in a few weeks when things settle down." When things settle down. As if his brain surgery and his marriage imploding were just temporary inconveniences that would smooth themselves out with time. Jake started drinking. Not heavily, the medications prevented that, but enough to blur the edges of reality. Enough to make the silence of the house bearable. Enough to let him sleep without dreaming of Stephanie's note. "I found someone better." By month 3, Jake could move normally again. The staples were gone, replaced by a scar hidden beneath his growing hair. Physically, he was recovering. Mentally, he was drowning. The isolation was crushing. His colleagues from Northwestern sent cards and emails that went unanswered. His old journalism buddies checked in sporadically, but Jake couldn't bring himself to engage. What was there to say? That he'd survived brain surgery only to discover his life was already dead? Month 4 arrived like a prison sentence. Jake went through the motions: physical therapy, medication, eating just enough to survive. Geneva Page still brought casseroles. Though she'd stopped knocking and just left them on the porch with cheerful notes Jake barely read. He was existing, not living. Breathing because his autonomic nervous system demanded it, not because he had any particular desire to continue. On a Tuesday morning in his 4th month of recovery, Jake stood in his bathroom, staring at the bottles of medication lined up on the counter. Pain pills, anti-seizure medication, anti-inflammatories. Enough to end this prolonged agony. This half-life he was stumbling through. His reflection in the mirror showed a stranger, gaunt, hollow-eyed, defeated. The famous investigative journalist who never quit had finally found his breaking point. He unscrewed the first bottle. The doorbell rang. Jake froze, pills in hand. The doorbell rang again, insistent. He set down the bottle and walked downstairs. Each step feeling like a betrayal of the escape he'd been planning. Through the frosted glass of the front door, he could see a figure, tall and lean. Jake opened the door. A man stood on his porch, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes and an uncertain smile. He wore jeans and a leather jacket, holding a motorcycle helmet under one arm. Something about his face was familiar, though Jake couldn't place it. "Jake Bowers?" the man asked. "Who's asking?" "My name is Morris Pace. I'm your half-brother." Jake stared at him. "My what?" Morris shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Your dad, our dad, William Bowers. He had an affair with my mother 35 years ago. I know this is a shock, but I've been trying to find you for months. I finally tracked you down through university records, and then I heard about your surgery and everything else, and I figured maybe you could use some family right now." Jake's mind struggled to process this information. His father had died 10 years ago. A man Jake had never been particularly close to. William Bowers had been distant, emotionally unavailable, married to his work as an engineer. The idea that he'd had another son, a whole other family, seemed impossible. "Do you have proof?" Jake asked, his journalist instincts kicking in despite everything. Morris pulled out his phone, showing Jake a photo of a young William Bowers with a woman Jake didn't recognize. The woman was holding a baby. Another photo showed Morris as a child with William, dated from the early 90s. More photos followed, spanning years. "Mom died 3 years ago," Morris said quietly. "Before she passed, she told me about Dad. About you. I wanted to meet you earlier, but I wasn't sure how you'd react. Then, I heard about what happened to surgery, your wife, and I thought, screw uncertainty. Life's too short." Jake looked at this stranger, claiming to be his brother. Morris had their father's nose, the same sharp jaw. If this was a con, it was an elaborate one. But more importantly, standing in his doorway at the exact moment Jake had been about to end, everything felt like more than coincidence. "Come in," Jake said finally. They sat in the living room, awkward at first, but Morris had an easy way about him that gradually dissolved the tension. He explained how he'd grown up in Seattle with his mother, how William had visited twice a year, how he'd always known he had an older half-brother somewhere, but had never been given details. After their father's death, Morris had inherited some money and documents that finally gave him Jake's name. "What do you do?" Jake asked, Genuinely curious now. I'm a cybersecurity consultant. Freelance. Mostly corporate clients who need their systems protected from hackers. It's good work, flexible. Morris paused. I know this is weird. Me showing up out of nowhere. But I've been following your career for years, Jake. Your journalism work was incredible. The Senator Morrison takedown? That was art. Something stirred in Jake's chest, not quite hope, but something close to it. Interest, maybe. The fog he'd been living in for 4 months seemed to thin slightly. I was about to do something stupid when you rang the doorbell, Jake admitted. Morris's expression grew serious. How stupid? Very. I'm glad I'm late to everything, then. Timing has never been my strong suit. Morris leaned forward. Look, I don't know you yet, and you don't know me, but I know about your wife, about the divorce, and I know that feeling of being completely alone. When Mom died, I had nobody. No siblings I knew about, no extended family. It was the darkest period of my life. But I got through it, and I'm here to tell you that you can too. She left me while I was in surgery, Jake said, the words tumbling out. Brain surgery. She couldn't wait until I woke up, couldn't wait until I was stable. She just gave up on me. Then she's an idiot, Morris said bluntly. And I know that probably doesn't help. But it's true. Anyone who walks out on family during a medical crisis is fundamentally broken. That's on her, not you. They talked for 3 hours. Morris told stories about growing up, about their father's visits, about learning to code and hack systems as a teenager. Jake found himself sharing stories too about his journalism career, about Emma, even about the good years with Stephanie before everything fell apart. It felt strange to talk to someone who was blood family, but completely new, someone who had no preconceptions or expectations. When Morris finally stood to leave, he handed Jake a card with his phone number. I'm staying at a hotel downtown for a few days. Call me anytime, okay? And Jake, don't do anything stupid. Please. I just found you. I don't want to lose you. After Morris left, Jake stood in his living room, holding the card. The crushing isolation that had been suffocating him for months felt fractionally lighter. He had a brother, a half-brother, technically, but family nonetheless. Someone who'd sought him out, who'd traveled across the country to meet him, who'd appeared at the exact moment Jake needed it most. Jake put away the medication bottles, without taking any pills. He wasn't fixed, not by a long shot, but he was no longer completely alone. And that, for now, was enough. Over the next 2 weeks, Morris became a regular presence in Jake's life. He'd show up with takeout, or drag Jake out for walks around the neighborhood, or simply sit and talk about everything and nothing. Morris had a sharp wit and an irreverent sense of humor that cut through Jake's depression like a knife through fog. More importantly, he listened without judgment and offered advice without condescension. So, what's the plan? Morris asked one evening, sitting on Jake's back porch with beers. Jake's first since surgery, approved by his doctor during the last checkup. What plan? Come on, Jake. You're an investigative journalist. Your wife screws you over in the cruelest way possible, and you're just going to take it lying down? What am I supposed to do? She made her choice. Morris shook his head. That's the depression talking. The Jake Bowers who took down Senator Morrison wouldn't accept defeat like this. Something about this whole situation stinks. The timing, the coldness of it, the way your daughter is being kept from you. Don't you want to know what's really going on? Jake was quiet for a long moment. The truth was, he did want to know. The journalist in him had been asking questions since the beginning, but the shattered husband had been too broken to pursue answers. Why had Stephanie really left? What was Randall Jenkins offering that Jake couldn't? And more importantly, why had she been so cruel about it? Stephanie could be distant, calculating even, but outright cruelty had never been her style. Even if I wanted to investigate, Jake said slowly, I'm not exactly in peak form. I'm still recovering, still putting my life back together. So, let me help, Morris offered. I'm good with computers, remember? We can dig into this Randall Jenkins guy, find out who he really is. Maybe there's nothing there. Maybe he's exactly what he appears to be. But maybe there's more to the story. Jake looked at his half-brother. Why do you care so much? Because you're my brother, Morris said simply. And because nobody deserves what happened to you. And maybe because I'm nosy as hell, and this sounds like an interesting puzzle. A small smile tugged at Jake's lips, the first genuine smile in months. You're crazy. Maybe, but I'm also right. So what do you say? Want to find out who Randall Jenkins really is? Jake took a long pull from his beer, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: curiosity. The investigative instinct that had driven his career was waking up, stretching like a cat after a long sleep. "All right," Jake said. "Let's dig." They started that night. Morris set up in Jake's home office, bringing over equipment from his hotel: laptops, external drives, devices Jake didn't recognize. While Morris worked his technical magic, Jake used his old-fashioned journalism methods: phone calls, public records searches, social media, deep dives. Randall Jenkins was 45 years old, originally from Ohio. He'd moved to Chicago 7 years ago to work for Vitalmax Pharmaceuticals, a mid-sized company specializing in cancer medications and pain management drugs. On paper, he looked successful: expensive car, nice apartment in Lincoln Park, active social media, showing dinners at high-end restaurants and weekend trips to luxury resorts. "Guy's a real winner," Morris commented sarcastically, scrolling through Instagram photos of Randall. "Look at him, all slicked back hair and fake smile. What did Stephanie see in this douche?" "Money, probably," Jake said. "Real estate's been slow the last few years. Stephanie always worried about finances, about maintaining a certain lifestyle." "Did you guys have money problems?" "Not serious ones. We were comfortable, but I'm a teacher now, not a high-profile journalist. The salary's decent, but not spectacular. Stephanie wanted more: bigger house, nicer cars, vacations to Europe instead of camping trips." Morris pulled up financial records: nothing illegal, just publicly available information from property records, business filings, court documents. "Randall's doing well financially, that's for sure. But here's something interesting: he's been divorced twice. Both times, the marriages lasted less than 2 years. Serial monogamist? Or serial something else?" Morris dug deeper. First wife was Margaret Chen, married in 2008, divorced in 2010. Settlement records show she got next to nothing. Second wife was Lisa Harper, married in 2015, divorced in 2017. Also got very little in the settlement. How is that possible? Illinois is a no-fault divorce state with equitable distribution. Good question. Let me see if I can find the divorce filings. Morris's fingers flew across the keyboard. Okay, interesting. Both wives signed prenups, which is normal for high earners. But both prenups had infidelity clauses that heavily favored Randall. And in both cases, Randall accused the wives of cheating. Jake leaned forward. Was there proof? Pictures, apparently. Circumstantial but damning enough that both women took small settlements rather than fight it out in court. Pictures that could have been staged, Jake said, his mind working through possibilities. What if Randall is a predator? What if he targets women, marries them quickly, then manufactures evidence of infidelity to get out with minimal financial impact? That's dark, but why bother? If he's making good money, why not just stay single? Control, maybe. Or there's something else we're not seeing. Jake grabbed his phone. "I need to talk to these ex-wives. If Randall has a pattern, they'll know." Tracking down Margaret Chin took 2 days, but Jake's old journalism contacts came through. She was living in California now, working as a nurse. When Jake reached her by phone and explained he was researching Randall Jenkins, there was a long silence. "Why?" Margaret asked finally. "He's involved with my soon-to-be ex-wife. I'm trying to understand who he is." Another silence. Then, "Get her away from him. Whatever it takes, get her away." "Why? What happened?" Margaret's story spilled out. She'd met Randall at a hospital fundraiser where she was working. He'd been charming, attentive, successful. They dated for 6 months before he proposed. The marriage was good at first: expensive dinners, weekend getaways, gifts. But then Randall started asking about her finances, her family's assets. Margaret's parents had recently passed away, leaving her a substantial inheritance. "He wanted me to invest in a medical equipment startup he was involved with," Margaret explained. "Said it was a sure thing, that we'd double our money. I was going to do it, but something fell off. I consulted a lawyer friend who looked into the company. It was a shell corporation. The startup didn't actually exist." "What happened when you confronted him?" "He apologized, said he'd been misled too, that he was a victim of the fraud. But I didn't believe him. I started pulling away, reconsidering the marriage. Then suddenly, there were photos of me supposedly meeting a man at a hotel. The photos were real. I had met a man at a hotel, but it was my cousin helping me move some of my parents' belongings from a storage unit nearby. Randall twisted it, made it look like an affair. He threatened to drag me through a messy divorce, to ruin my nursing career with the scandal. I just wanted out, so I took the settlement and left. After hanging up with Margaret, Jake felt sick. The pattern was clear. Randall targeted women with assets, charmed them into marriage, tried to get access to their money, and when that failed, manufactured grounds for divorce that left him financially protected. Lisa Harper, the second ex-wife, told a similar story when Jake reached her 2 days later. She'd inherited a small business from her father. Randall had pushed her to sell it and invest the money in pharmaceutical opportunities he could access through his company. When she refused and started asking too many questions, photos appeared of her supposedly having lunch with an ex-boyfriend. She'd been meeting with a financial advisor, a man. Yes, but completely innocent. Randall hadn't cared about the truth. He's a con artist, Jake told Morris after the second call. He targets women with money or assets, marries them quickly, tries to get financial access. And when they resist, he creates fake evidence of infidelity to divorce them without losing anything. So what does Stephanie have that he wants? Morris asked. Jake thought about it. She has the house we bought it 15 years ago, and it's worth about $800,000 now. The mortgage is almost paid off, and she has her real estate business, which does well in good years. But there's something else. What? My life insurance. I have a $2 million policy through the university. Stephanie is still the beneficiary. I haven't had the chance to change it yet, with everything that's been happening. Morris stared at him. Jake, when were you diagnosed with the tumor? 6 months ago. And when did Stephanie meet Randall? About 4 months before the surgery. Which means she met him 2 months after your diagnosis. Morris pulled up Randall's work history. He works for VitalMax Pharmaceuticals. They make cancer medications. What if he has access to patient information? What if he's using medical databases to target people? The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. He knew I was sick. He knew I had a brain tumor and a large life insurance policy. He targeted Stephanie deliberately. And if you had died during surgery, Stephanie would have been a wealthy widow who was already emotionally attached to Randall. Jake's hands were shaking. That son of a bitch. He didn't just steal my wife. He was betting on me dying. Morris's expression was grim. We need proof. Suspicions aren't enough. We need to prove he accessed confidential medical information, that he targeted Stephanie deliberately, and that his entire relationship with her is built on fraud. I know how to get proof, Jake said, his mind already working through the angles. I've done it before, but it's going to take time and planning. How much time? A few weeks. Maybe a month. Jake felt something settling into place inside him, not quite peace, but purpose. For 4 months, he'd been a victim. Now he was an investigator again. I need to reach out to some old contacts. And I need your help with the technical side. Whatever you need, Morris said. Let's take this bastard down. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake and Morris built their case methodically. Morris, using his cybersecurity skills, discovered that Randall had been accessing VitalMax's patient database, a database that included information from partner hospitals where VitalMax drugs were used. Jake's hospital was one of them. More specifically, Morris found logs showing that Randall had searched for patients with brain cancer diagnoses who also had large life insurance policies. This is incredibly illegal, Morris said, staring at his screen. HIPAA violations, unauthorized access to medical records, fraud. This guy could go to prison for years. Not could. Will. Jake corrected. But we need to be careful. If we go to the police now, a good lawyer might get the evidence suppressed because of how we obtained it. We need to build an airtight case. Jake reached out to Anderson Burke, his neurologist friend. Burke was appalled when Jake explained the situation. If Randall Jenkins has been accessing patient information to target vulnerable people, that's not just criminal, it's monstrous, Burke said. Let me make some calls. I have contacts at the FBI's healthcare fraud division. Not yet, Jake said. I need to document everything first. I need to understand the full scope of what he's done. Through his old journalism network, Jake contacted a private investigator named Teresa Roy, someone he'd worked with on the Senator Morrison case. Teresa was sharp, discreet, and expensive, but Jake still had some savings. He hired her to follow Randall and Stephanie, to document their activities, their finances, their interactions. Teresa's reports came in daily. Randall and Stephanie were living together in his Lincoln Park apartment. Stephanie seemed happy in the photos. Smiling, relaxed, dressed in expensive clothes Jake had never seen before. The images hurt, but Jake forced himself to view them objectively, as evidence rather than personal betrayal. Then, Teresa discovered something crucial. Randall was meeting regularly with a woman named Ashley Arnold, a nurse who worked at the hospital where Jake had his surgery. The meetings were always brief, always in public places, but there was a pattern to them. Ashley would hand Randall an envelope. Randall would hand Ashley cash. "She's selling him information," Morris said, looking at Teresa's photos. "Patient information. She probably has access to the hospital's database and is feeding him details about patients with large life insurance policies." Jake called Anderson Burke. "I need you to look into a nurse named Ashley Arnold. She's at Chicago Memorial, works in oncology." Burke called back within hours. "Ashley Arnold has been flagged internally for suspicious computer access patterns. The hospital security noticed she was looking at patient files outside her assigned cases. They were investigating quietly, but nothing's been proven yet. Tell them to keep investigating, but don't tip her off. I need her to lead us to everything Randall's been doing." The investigation expanded. Jake discovered that Randall had targeted at least 6 other people besides Stephanie over the past 3 years, all patients with serious diagnoses and large life insurance policies, all married or in relationships. In 3 cases, the patients had died. In 2 of those cases, Randall had maintained contact with the widows after their spouses' deaths, though eventually those relationships faded. "He's running a long con," Jake explained to Morris. "He targets terminally ill patients through Ashley. He seduces their spouses, positions himself as the someone better they deserve. If the patient dies, he's there to comfort the widow and potentially access life insurance money. If the patient survives, like I did, he's already maneuvered the spouse into divorce, maybe hoping to still get access to assets through the relationship." "This is bigger than we thought," Morris said. "He's not just a con artist. He's a predator who's targeting dying people and their families." Jake felt cold fury settling in his chest. Randall Jenkins hadn't just destroyed Jake's marriage, he'd done this to others. 3 people had died, their final days poisoned by the betrayal of their spouses, their families fractured by a predator who saw terminal illness as a business opportunity. "We have enough for the FBI," Morris said. "We should take this to them now." "Not yet," Jake replied. "The FBI will arrest Randall, sure, but they might not have enough evidence to convict him on everything, especially the more circumstantial connections. A good lawyer could argue coincidence, that he just happened to meet these people, that Ashley was acting alone. And Stephanie is a victim too. In a way, she doesn't know what Randall really is. You still care about her." "I care about Emma," Jake corrected. "My daughter's living with this monster. She thinks he's her mother's boyfriend, but he's actually a predator who hoped I'd die, so he could steal my life insurance. I need to do this right. I need to not just stop Randall. I need to expose him completely, undeniably, in a way that protects Emma and shows Stephanie exactly what she's gotten herself into." Morris nodded slowly. "So, what's the plan?" Jake smiled, not a happy smile, but one full of grim determination. "I'm going to do what I do best. I'm going to tell a story, a true story, and when I'm done, Randall Jenkins will have nowhere to hide." Jake spent the next 3 weeks crafting his expose. Not an article, something bigger, a full investigative documentary. He reached out to his old colleagues from his journalism days, calling in favors, assembling a team. His department chair at Northwestern, once he heard what Jake was investigating, gave him access to university resources and student assistance. The documentary would expose everything. Randall's pattern of targeting terminal patients, Ashley Arnold's sale of confidential medical information, the illegal database searches, the manufactured evidence in his previous divorces. But it would also tell the personal stories Margaret Chin, Lisa Harper, the families of the 3 patients who had died, and Jake would tell his own story, the man who survived brain surgery only to discover his wife had abandoned him for a predator who'd been hoping he'd die. Morris handled the technical side, securing the illegally obtained evidence in ways that would make it admissible creating redundant backups, building a digital paper trail that even the best lawyers couldn't dispute. Anderson Burke connected Jake with medical ethicists and legal experts who could speak on camera about the violations involved. Teresa Roy tracked down the families of the 3 deceased patients. 2 agreed to participate in the documentary. They'd sensed something wrong at the time, the way their dying husband had been abandoned, the way the new boyfriend had appeared so quickly, but they'd been too grief-stricken to investigate. Now, learning the truth, they were eager to help bring Randall down. Jake also reached out to Emma through a letter, carefully worded. He didn't mention the investigation or accuse Randall. He simply told his daughter that he loved her, that he was recovering well, that he hoped they could see each other soon. He included photos of himself now healthy, smiling, clearly not the broken man she'd last seen in the hospital. Emma called him 2 days later. "Dad? Hi, sweetheart. You look really good. In the photos. I'm feeling much better. The surgery was successful, and I've been working hard on recovery." There was a pause. Then, in a small voice, "Mom said you'd be sick for a long time," she said. "She said you might not make it." Jake's heart clenched. "I'm okay, Emma. I'm going to be okay. Can I see you? Mom's been weird about it, but I miss you." "Of course. Anytime. You can come over this weekend if you want." When Emma arrived on Saturday, Jake was struck by how much she'd changed in 4 months. She was taller, her face more mature, but also more guarded. Morris was there. Jake had told Emma about his half-brother in the letter, and his easy humor helped break the ice. They spent the day together, carefully avoiding the topic of Stephanie and Randall. Jake showed Emma what he'd been working on, not the documentary about Randall, but a different project, a series on investigative journalism techniques he was developing for his classes. Emma, who'd always been interested in her father's work, asked intelligent questions. By the end of the day, some of the old warmth between them had returned. As Emma was leaving, she hugged Jake tightly. "I'm sorry, Dad, for not visiting sooner. For believing you wouldn't be okay. It's not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is your fault." After she left, Morris said, "You didn't tell her about Randall." "Not yet, but soon. When the documentary is ready, she'll need to know the truth before it goes public." The documentary took 6 weeks to complete. Jake worked obsessively, driven by purpose for the first time since his surgery. He interviewed victims, compiled evidence, built a narrative that was both damning and airtight. The final cut was 90 minutes long, devastating in its thoroughness. Before releasing it, Jake sent advance copies to the FBI, the Illinois State Police, and the hospital administration where Ashley Arnold worked. He included all the evidence Morris had compiled, the statements from victims, the financial records, everything. The response was immediate. The FBI opened a formal investigation into Randall Jenkins and Ashley Arnold for healthcare fraud, conspiracy, and illegal access to medical records. The hospital suspended Ashley pending their internal investigation and fired her 3 days later. The Illinois Medical Board began proceedings to revoke her nursing license. Randall was arrested at his office on a Tuesday morning. The charges included multiple counts of healthcare fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unauthorized access to protected medical information. The bail was set at $500,000. Stephanie called Jake that afternoon, her voice shaking. "What did you do?" "I investigated," Jake said calmly. "That's what I do. I find the truth. Randall's been arrested." The FBI came to the apartment. They took his computer, his files, everything. They asked me questions about him, about how we met. "Jake, what's going on? Did Randall ever tell you how he knew I had a brain tumor?" Silence. "Did he tell you he worked for a pharmaceutical company that had access to my medical records? Did he mention that he specifically searches for terminal patients with large life insurance policies?" "What are you talking about?" "Randall Jenkins is a con artist, Stephanie. He targeted you because I was sick, and we have a $2 million life insurance policy with you as the beneficiary. He was hoping I die during surgery so he could comfort the wealthy widow." "That's insane. You're making this up because you're angry." "I have proof. Video testimony from his ex-wives. Financial records. Computer logs showing he accessed my medical information illegally. The FBI has all of it. Stephanie, he's done this before. To at least 6 other families. 3 of those patients died. Randall doesn't love you. He never did. You were a mark." The line went quiet for so long Jake thought she'd hung up. Then he heard her crying. "I left you when you needed me most," she said, finally. "I believed him when he said you probably wouldn't make it, that I deserved to move on, to find happiness." "Oh God, Jake, what have I done?" Jake felt no satisfaction in her breakdown. Just a hollow sadness for the life they'd had, for the years together that Randall had poisoned. "You were a victim too, Stephanie. He manipulated you, but you still made choices. You left me divorce papers while I was in surgery. You kept Emma from me for months. Those were your decisions. I know. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Save your apologies. You're going to need them for Emma. She's going to have a lot of questions when the documentary goes public tomorrow." "Documentary?" "I made a full investigative documentary about Randall. It's going to air on multiple platforms tomorrow night. Everything he's done, everyone he's hurt, it's all there. I suggest you watch it, and I suggest you figure out how to explain to our daughter why you abandoned her father for a predator." Jake hung up before Stephanie could respond. His hands were shaking, but not from weakness. From the controlled fury that had sustained him through 6 weeks of investigation, editing, and planning. Randall Jenkins had bet on Jake dying. He'd bet on Jake being too sick, too broken, too destroyed to fight back. He'd bet wrong. The documentary, titled Terminal Betrayal, aired simultaneously on 3 streaming platforms and a major news network's investigative journalism hour. The response was immediate and explosive. Social media erupted with outrage. News outlets picked up the story, running follow-up investigations. VitalMax Pharmaceuticals suspended Randall and launched an internal review. More victims came forward, people Randall had targeted who hadn't been included in Jake's initial investigation. The FBI's case grew stronger by the day. Randall's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The public outcry too intense. Emma watched the documentary with Jake and Morris. She cried through most of it, horrified by what Randall had done, devastated by her mother's role in it. Afterward, she looked at her father with new eyes. "You could have just gotten revenge," she said. "You could have just destroyed him, but you exposed him to help other people, to prevent him from doing this again." "That's what journalists do," Jake replied. "We find the truth, even when it's painful, especially when it's painful." Emma moved back home the next day, bringing her belongings from Stephanie's apartment. Stephanie didn't fight it. She was dealing with her own fallout, friends who'd seen the documentary and were asking difficult questions, family members demanding explanations, the social stigma of being revealed as someone who'd abandoned a dying spouse. The divorce proceedings changed dramatically. With the circumstances of Stephanie's departure now public record, Jake's lawyer negotiated a settlement heavily in his favor. Stephanie would get minimal assets, no alimony, and limited custody of Emma, who was old enough to choose where she wanted to live anyway. Randall Jenkins went to trial 4 months after his arrest. The evidence was overwhelming. Ashley Arnold had already pled guilty and was testifying against him. Margaret Chin and Lisa Harper both testified about his pattern of manipulation. The families of the deceased patients provided devastating testimony about what Randall had done to their dying loved ones. Jake attended the trial every day, sitting in the gallery with Morris, Anderson, Burke, and Teresa Roy. Randall never looked at him, but Jake didn't need eye contact. He just needed justice. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all 26 counts, Randall Jenkins was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, with additional state charges pending. Ashley Arnold received 8 years. Both would also face massive civil penalties from lawsuits filed by victims' families. After the sentencing, Jake stood on the courthouse steps with Emma and Morris, facing a crowd of reporters. He'd spent 20 years on the other side of these interviews, asking the questions. Now, he was providing answers. "Mr. Bowers, how does it feel to have brought Randall Jenkins to justice?" "It feels like the end of a long nightmare," Jake replied. "But more importantly, it feels like closure for the families he victimized. This was never just about me. It was about exposing a predator who targeted the most vulnerable people, those facing death, and those who loved them." "Will you return to investigative journalism full-time?" Jake glanced at Emma, then at Morris. "I'm already back. I've been offered a position at a major news network developing investigative documentaries. I'll also continue teaching at Northwestern." Turns out surviving brain surgery and exposing a major criminal conspiracy is good for your career prospects. The reporters laughed. More questions followed. But Jake kept his answers focused on the victims, on the importance of investigating even when it's personal, on the need for better protections for patient medical information. Driving home afterward, Emma was quiet in the passenger seat. Finally, she said, "Are you ever going to forgive Mom?" Jake thought about it. Forgiveness is complicated. Your mother was manipulated, that's true. But she also made choices that hurt me deeply when I was at my most vulnerable. I may forgive her someday, but I'll never forget, and we'll never be what we were. That's fair. You can still have a relationship with her, you know. She's still your mother. I know, but it's going to take time. A lot of time. Emma looked at her father. You were so strong through all of this. I don't know how you did it. I almost didn't, Jake admitted. Morris showed up the day I was planning to end it all. If he hadn't rung that doorbell when he did, I wouldn't be here. Then I'm glad he has terrible timing, Emma said softly. Morris, driving, grinned. Best worst timing of my life. That evening, Jake stood in his backyard, looking at the house that had almost been empty forever. Emma was inside making dinner. She'd become an excellent cook during her time with Stephanie. Morris was staying for a while longer, helping Jake adjust to his sudden return to prominence in the journalism world. Geneva Page had brought over one final casserole, this time in celebration rather than sympathy. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from Anderson Burke. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate. Another text from Teresa Roy. 3 more cases want your help. Possible healthcare fraud. Interested? A third text from his department chair. The documentary is being submitted for a Peabody Award. Congratulations. Jake? Jake looked at his phone, then at his house, then at the sky darkening into evening. 6 months ago, he'd been on an operating table, his skull open, his future uncertain. Then, he'd woken to divorce papers and the cruelest abandonment imaginable. He'd spent months broken, isolated, drowning in despair. But he'd survived, not just the surgery, but the aftermath. He'd found a brother he didn't know existed, reconnected with his daughter, and exposed a predator who'd been victimizing vulnerable families for years. The famous investigative journalist had turned his own tragedy into a story that mattered, that helped people, that achieved justice. Randall Jenkins had bet on Jake dying. When that failed, he'd probably bet on Jake staying broken, staying destroyed, being too weak to fight back. He'd lost both bets. Jake pocketed his phone and went inside, where his daughter and brother were arguing good-naturedly about how much garlic belonged in pasta sauce. The house was full of life again, full of family, full of purpose. The scar on his skull was hidden beneath hair now, but Jake didn't mind the reminder. He'd survived brain surgery. He'd survived betrayal. He'd survived the darkest depression of his life. He was Jake Bowers. He was an investigative journalist, a father, a brother, a survivor. And he'd won. Not because he'd destroyed his enemies, though he had done that, but because he'd found the truth and shared it with the world. Because he'd turned his pain into purpose. Because when life had given him every reason to quit, he'd found one reason to keep going, and then another and another, until suddenly he had a whole life worth living again. The ending